Let's turn our attention to the concept of diversity and inclusion. What is the key for inclusive workplace culture, and how can the mix work in companies? The next speaker is Constanze Osei-Becker, and she is the Public Policy Officer of Facebook. So welcome and make some noise for Constanze.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Constanze, and as said, I work in public policy for Facebook in Berlin. And the topic that I'm going to talk to you about today is a topic that I feel very passionate about and that I've been very engaged in for years inside and outside of the company. It's also a topic that is very close to the mission and the DNA of our company, of Facebook. And it's indeed about diversity and inclusion. And the question is how to make the mix work. Because you can have diversity, but if you don't have the inclusion piece, if you don't have an inclusive workspace, diversity is not working for you or your business. So let me start with a personal story. So I have history with this fair. So I just realized that this is my 10th time, I think, at CeBIT. So I was here in various roles, as an intern, as a student worker, as in my first job, second job, third job. I always ended up at CeBIT for some reasons. And when I browsed through my memories and the pictures and the postings, I realized that I never wore my hair like this. I never had it curly and open and wild and hard to manage today. I always had it straightened or in a tight bun. And you might ask yourself, okay, why is she bringing hair to this discussion? It has a reason. Because actually, it was a decision that I made because I felt like wearing my hair like this, maybe even combined with like some bright, crazy colors, is not very corporate-y. I'm not going to be taken serious by my mates, by the people that I meet. It's not very German policy style. So I decided to turn it down and wear it straight or in a bun. And what I actually did or did not do, I did not bring my true self to work. So I did hide some parts of my identity because I didn't feel like I can make it and people take me seriously if I brought them to the table. And in research, people call it covering. It is hiding parts of your identity, marginalized parts of your identity, because you feel otherwise you're not accepted, you're not welcome in a certain setting. And I'm not just talking about hair or color. I'm also talking about members of the LGBT community. I'm talking about people who are of a certain religion, who maybe even wear visual statements of that religion, form of a veil or a kippah. So it really goes in a lot of ways. And hiding parts of yourself and not being able to bring your true self to work is exhausting. It takes up so much energy. You can do it for a meeting, you can do it for 2 meetings, but having constantly the feeling that you can't really be yourself at work, and we all spend way too much time at work, is really exhausting, and it takes energy from you. And this energy you can't put into your work. You're not as creative, you're not as innovative, you're not as confident as you could be or would be if you just could be yourself. And it does come with a price tag also for the company, right? It's not just exhausting for you personally. Because as I said, you're not as productive, you're not as innovative. And maybe it comes with a price tag in terms of retention. Because if your HR has done the job, and it is a tough job to really hire a diverse workforce, right? To reach out to certain groups, to include them in the company. It's not easy, but it's out there. So the pipeline problem is actually not an issue, right? If you have you should have the resources, the will, and the strength to really go for it and find that diverse talent. And if you did so, congratulations, because it's not easy. But once you've onboarded them to your company, when they don't feel welcomed, when they don't feel like they can, bring themselves to work and they're accepted and they can just feel comfortable, guess what? They just leave. And that is particularly true for the millennials, the high-skilled millennials that a lot of the companies are dealing with. So it does come with a price tag. So before I jump into the question, how can we actually make a workplace more inclusive, let me just dive into the 2 concepts of diversity and inclusion. So diversity is, or our difference, group social differences. Franziska touched on some categories of diversity, and I want to touch on, not really cognitive diversity, but rather really differences in your social group. So I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about sexual orientation, I'm talking about religion, political views, ethnicity, cultural backgrounds. That is diversity. It is basically the who and the what. So who is being hired? Who is being promoted? Who is sitting at the table? This is diversity. Tick the box. When we talk about inclusion, on the other hand, we talk about the how. It's more a verb. So it's really the activities, the behavior that really embrace that diversity within your organization. It's about the question, do you make people feel comfortable? Do you value their feedback? Can they feel comfortable in your organization? And can they grow in your organization? So it's really the intentional, ongoing engagement with diversity. This is what inclusion is. And to translate it to what I said earlier, it's basically the question, can people bring their true selves to work? And talking about inclusion, it's also very important to note that inclusion drives productivity. So if people feel included, they're more creative, more productive. They might tend to stay longer at your company. And if people feel welcomed and if they feel comfortable in an organization, in a company, you can be sure that they're not just doing their call of duty and their 9 till 5, but they're really bringing a lot more to the table. So given the impact that inclusion can have for your organization, for your company, for your team, the question is, of course, now, how can we reach inclusion in the workspace? And it's not trivial, because unlike with at least certain aspects of diversity, it's hard to measure, right? You can't really put KPIs to it, you can't really tick the boxes. That's different with inclusion. It's a process, and it's a bit more complex, but it is doable. And I'm going to dive into five examples, 5 categories that can help to build a more inclusive workspace. And there is something in it for everyone. So the first is on a very broad and meta level, it's culture. So does your company, does your organization have a culture that is welcoming inclusion? So I give you an example of my company, Facebook. We have 2 values that I personally like very much in that respect. One is be open, so be transparent, be collaborative. That's a value that we have. Another one, which is very important in that respect, is be bold, be daring, dare something. And by being bold, I also mean be bold and dare to have really hard conversations. Like the stuff that is hard, the stuff that is kind of itchy and painful, the conversations that you don't like to have, right? I mean, we're human beings. We're not jumping into, uncomfortable situations like that. But it's only then when you really can get the real feedback, when you really can have crucial conversations about sensitive topics, that you can get better personally, but also as an organization. And like I said, we're all humans. We don't like that kind of situations. We tend to avoid them in our private lives, but also in our professional lives. Totally understandable. What we at Facebook offer is a course which is called Crucial Conversation, that gives you tools at hand to basically be able to have those conversations in a respectful way. So the second thing, and it should not come as a surprise, is leadership, of course. Leaders are crucial and very important in that process. So there are different elements of being an inclusive leader, and I think Franziska has touched on some of them. One is, for example, do you make sure that everybody in your team can speak up and is being heard? The juniors in your team, the women in your team, the person who is not that elaborate because maybe your company's language is not the person's first language. Can they all speak up in meetings, and do you hear them? Do you listen to them? If you do, can they bring ideas to the table and maybe challenge other ideas or existing structures? Do you allow them to do that? Do you give credit where credit is due? To teams, to individuals? Do you call them out? Are you a sponsor? Are you a mentor? So those are elements that really define an inclusive leader, and there are certainly many more. The other thing, and I just talked about measurement and putting KPIs to the concept of inclusion, which is not really possible, but there are ways of getting a feel for the level of inclusion that you have in your organization. And we all know the tool. It's a survey. So we at Facebook, we have employee surveys every 6 months. And I think it's very important if you measure, if you try to do those surveys, that you really put in the hard questions. So of course, relevant questions. Is there enough parking space? Are the canteen opening hours enough? All relevant questions. But if you want to get a sense for the level of inclusion in the organization, put in the hard questions, right? So, do you feel respected in the workplace? Do you think your manager takes your feedback into account? Do you feel respected? Do you feel safe? Do you intend to stay like 1 or 3 years in the company, or rather 5 or 10 years? Those are all indicators who at least give you a feeling for the level of inclusion. Another thing, and I really love that part, is because it's like grassroots, right? This is something that everybody can do. It's about groups, employee groups. So we at Facebook, we call them employee resource groups, ERPs. And it's about connecting over shared similarities with other people. So we have the mothers at Facebook group, the Black at Facebook group, the Latinos at Facebook group, the Muslims at Facebook group. So various groups. And it's not about distancing yourself from others as a group or as an individual. Quite the contrary. It's about, and there is psychological research, if you, and it's also a part of inclusion, you want to be valued for your differences, for the specific and special things you bring to the table. But at the same time, you do need a sense of belonging to an organization. And those groups, connecting with people with whom you share some similarities, can be something empowering, right? If you're always the only one in an organization, in the room, if you can't connect to people who share, similar features, similar challenges, it can get very lonely. So really having a sense of belonging and really getting empowered through those groups is a very important thing. And also, if you want to go even ahead of that, if you think for this particular group, things need to change in your organization, let's say for mothers, then you can get organized, right? It's really about advocacy internally. So you can come up with the demands and suggestions on how your organization, your team needs to change. And as always, it's easier being done as a group than it is alone. And if it's like really going well in the company, you have a sponsor from the leadership team that is actually helping you to make your point. And that brings me actually to my last point number 5, and that is being an ally. We at Facebook, we actually have a course that is called Being an Ally. And what being an ally is basically, everybody can be an ally for everyone, right? Men for women, white people for black people, straight for the gays. It's really about helping others in a given situation, helping other marginalized group through your power and your influence, and giving them space to speak and to be heard. And to give you a very simple example, and I assume you can all relate to it, being in a meeting, right, with, let's say, as a young woman with a lot of men, and you try to say something, and for various reasons, because you're not as confident, or you're being talked over and over, you can't make your point. If you have an ally in the room that basically says, "Oh, I think Jennifer wanted to say something. Oh, thanks, Frank, for the nice presentation. Great project, but I think we should also thank Nina because she had a big chunk of this work in this." Then you have room to basically be seen and heard, and this is very powerful. And I think being an ally is also the essence of inclusion. It's using your privilege and using the power that you have to get people in, to bring people in, instead of leaving them outside. So to sum it up, diversity is definitely a great thing, but it's not working without that inclusion piece. It's not fostering innovation, it's not growing your business, it's not giving you the competitive advantage that you might look for. And it's actually, that's why it's very important that it's not just window dressing or just a buzzword to make your organization look progressive, modern, and open. But instead, you do have to invest in the process, and you do have to invest in that inclusion piece. And inclusion doesn't come as a surprise, as all cultural change is slow, is hard. It's about consistency, but you can get there. And it's also very important to note, inclusion does not happen by accident. And inclusion does not happen naturally. So if you're serious about this, you have to be intentional, and really everybody in your organization has to internalize it. Otherwise, it's not working. And to sum it up, I think there is the perfect quote by Verna Myers, who is one of a very well-known researcher and activist in that field. And she says, diversity is being invited to the party, great. But inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think that's what it's all about. Thank you very much.